As many of you know, I got my Sega Saturn at the Japanese launch in 1994. Because I paid attention primarily to the Japanese market during this time, I was lavished with incredible releases constantly, suffering little of the trauma my brethren would see with their North American and European libraries. By 1996, there was an absolute deluge of software hitting the Saturn in Japan. I was well versed in arcade gaming, and kept up periodically with foreign Saturn magazines to try to catch up on what was coming out. Even with that in mind, I still missed a hell of a lot of games in Japan between 1994 and 2000. As the Saturn market began to wind down in Japan in 2000, I was finally able to explore some of the games I had missed in the years prior. In this episode, we will be looking at the Japanese games I missed during its life, and would discover thanks to word of mouth and recommendations a few years after the fact. I hope you guys enjoy obscure Japanese Sega Saturn games. Our first game was released in the latter half of 1997 and developed by Flare Software. Whizz is an isometric platformer where you star as a magical rabbit in his quest to make it back to his hot air balloon. I wouldn't play this one until the early 2000s, well after I'd already played Saturn games like Astol, Clockwork Knight, Mega Man X4, and Rayman. Whizz's presentation left a lot to be desired. The graphics here are nothing that couldn't have been easily duplicated on the 16-bit machines years earlier. The color use is okay, but the world design lacks any real eye candy or special effects to visually stimulate the player. This is particularly disappointing given the Saturn's ability to paint a strong 2D image, and in comparison to some of the other 32-bit games in the platforming genre, it was as tame as a pet rabbit. The music has some catchy tunes, but the same song will play across multiple stages, wearing out its welcome quickly. My dislike for this game was cemented with its gameplay, however. As many of you know, I do not care for the isometric viewpoint, and I care even less for games that play poorly in this form. Whizz moves around fast enough, but the speed often leads to frustrating missed jumps that result in damage from enemies and falling off things that require you to backtrack and repeat areas you've already gone through. Stages and enemy design leave a ton to be desired as well. You'll get sick of the limited moves this game gives you to attack, and even sicker of the puzzle-like stages that all look the same and have enemies that reappear. I'd learn later that this game was actually brought west and published by Konami in Europe. Why the hell Konami chose this to bring to Western Saturn fans is beyond me, especially with its own awesome games just begging for a release. If you were a European gamer exposed to this as a kid on one of the many other platforms it was released for, there may be some nostalgia here. For the rest of you, Whizz is a soulless, boring experience that lacks any long-term play value. Skip it. Mid-1996 would bring us the Emotion Digital Software developed Hissatsu, a side-scrolling action game inspired by a popular Japanese TV drama series. A group of do-gooder assassins set forth to right the wrongs of the world, punishing their prey by any means necessary. You get to choose 2 of 4 playable characters every stage, each with his own moveset and weapon of choice, and are swappable on the fly. Each target has a number of henchmen you must deal with to get to them, and each playable character has its own assassination scene if he is the one to deal the fatal blow. Graphically, the game isn't anything special. You get some pretty tame environments that don't have a ton of parallax scrolling or other special effects to make them stand out. The game has a fantastic soundtrack, however. If you've ever heard a Clint Eastwood western from back in the day, you'll recognize the style here. It has a tone and a flow to it very similar, and fits the overall atmosphere of the game well. Gameplay suffers from slight unresponsiveness, but nothing you can't overcome with timing adjustments and familiarity with the stages and enemies. If you're a fan of similar action games like Shinobi and Castlevania, Hissatsu may have something for you to enjoy. The stages get much more complex deeper in the game, and the target battles get much tougher as well. Coupled with that music, Hissatsu isn't a terrible Saturn experience by any stretch. I discovered MediaQuest's mid-1996 release, Death Throttle, only about 10 years or so ago. I had picked back up Saturn collecting on eBay, and ran across it and had no clue what the hell it was. I went ahead and picked it up cheap to check it out. This one here is basically Crazy Taxi before there was an actual Crazy Taxi. Set in a violent and desolate future, you are a cab driver trying to get his fares around without being gunned down and killed. Once you have a fare on board, you'll gun it across town within the time limit so you can build up cash. Your taxi is armed with guns and the ability to jump so you can deal with the many denizens of the wasteland. The moment I popped Death Throttle into the Saturn, I knew I had played it before. This is actually a port of the PC and 3DO release, Quarantine. The graphics are better here, with more detail and on-screen action, particularly in comparison to the 3DO version. It's not going to win any awards though, with copious amounts of draw-in and a frame rate that will tank on you from time to time. The gameplay can be frustrating to put it mildly, especially with the sheer amount of stuff on screen that is capable of stopping your vehicle dead in its tracks. The actual control isn't particularly good either, and I had a ton of trouble keeping my taxi on the road where I wanted it. Even so, the mix of Crazy Taxi and Twisted Metal gameplay is definitely unique, and if you can overlook some of its negatives, there may be something here for you to enjoy. I had heard of our next game long before I actually played it for the Saturn. Loadrunner: The Legend Returns was developed by Presage Software and released in early 1996. Essentially a collection of single-screen puzzle stages, you must traverse the areas with your player and collect gold to open up the exits. Levels start to get complicated with various obstacles in your way that must be overcome. You also have guardians that will stalk you like mini Terminators around the maps. It's a simple game in premise, but the execution actually becomes quite deep. Stages become real brain busters later in the game, and the challenge escalates quickly. The graphical presentation here is super simple, looking more like an 8-bit game than a powerhouse Saturn release. The music doesn't impress either, mainly consisting of ambient noises and simple rhythms. The strength of this one rests entirely in its puzzle elements and challenge, and if you're looking for those things, this one can be a sleeper hit on the Saturn. If you find that this is something you may enjoy, a standalone expansion was released a year later in early 1997, with considerably more difficult stages. Titled Loadrunner Extra, it would add 110 new levels to play, ensuring a ton of replay value for your money. In late 1995, Virgin Interactive would release Chaos Control, an on-rails full-motion video shooter. Compatible with the Sega Saturn shuttle mouse, you'll move your cursor around the screen and fire upon enemy ships as they fly into frame. You have no control over movement, as this is all pre-rendered with video. I would break this down like I would any other game, but I'd be wasting your time in doing so. Chaos Control is an awful experience, both in gameplay execution and presentation. The full motion video backdrops lack detail and appear washed out. When enemies are hit, they become obscured by terrible looking smoke effects to let you know they're hit, but will still fly around the screen, covering the advancement of new enemies on your position. The soundtrack is utterly crushed by the sound of the blasters firing, adding nothing to the atmosphere of the experience. This one would see a European release that was supposedly improved in a number of ways, So in late 1996, Virgin Interactive would publish Chaos Control Remix in Japan, with some of the new improvements in tow. This is basically the same game as before, with a few tweaks to the UI and in-game graphics. In my opinion, these changes are actually for the worse, as the poorly implemented smoke effects from the first game are just poorly implemented blobs in this one, obscuring the action even more than before. I also noticed that this new remix is harder than the first game, adding frustration to a game that needed no more negatives. I was never a big fan of full motion video shooters, and this poor effort adds nothing to change that. Both of these releases should be avoided unless you are a big fan of these types of games. Mechanical Violator Hakaider was released in late 1996 by Sega and developed by Japan Media Programming. This is a mixed genre adventure game comprised of an on-rail shooter akin to games like Dynamite Duke, as well as story-heavy segments where you can move around freely and interact with various things in the environment. It's a sequel to the 1995 Japanese film of the same name, and basically continues the exploits of the characters in town, while adding new enemies to deal with. The shooter segments are simple in execution, being nothing more than shoot the bad guys as they pop up, or shoot down missiles and grenades as they are sent your way. Boss battles are done this way as well, though a bit faster with more visual excitement. There is heavy inclusion of story elements that slow the action down incredibly, especially if you do not read or understand Japanese. Some of these areas last for extended periods of time too, meaning that it's easy to become disenchanted with the experience. Coming at it as late as I did, I had real trouble keeping focus while trying to fumble my way through the story. I would love to have seen an English translation of this so I could enjoy the other half of the game, but as it stands, it has a pretty large language barrier that makes it hard to recommend to the majority of you. It uses the shuttle mouse in the Sega Stunner light gun, so if you speak or read Japanese, there may be something here for you. Developed and published by Technosoft, Steeldom was released in late 1996 and supported the Tizen link cable for multiplayer matches. This 3D arena fighting game was something I knew about but never played while the Saturn was going strong in Japan. A few years later I'd go back and pick it up to see what it was, especially after I learned the famed Technosoft was responsible for it. What's here will put you in mind of Virtual On, but it plays radically different. So different in fact, that even after considerable time trying to come to terms with its mechanics, I still suck at it like I've never played it before. There are a number of specials you can use in addition to your normal blaster attacks, but I'll be damned if I can pull them off before the AI completely wrecks me. It's really tough to stay focused on your opponent with the way the camera swings as you move around, and the aggressive AI punishes you literally at every turn. It will show you no mercy, and stalk you relentlessly until you are defeated or knocked from the play area. The graphics aren't bad, with decent looking models and arenas, but I'm so busy watching the AI whoop my ass it's hard to enjoy. I concede that this one may be a lot better than I'm making it out because I simply cannot get the hang of how it plays, so I'll simply leave you guys with some of my shameful gameplay. Late 1996 would see the light gun shooter Mighty Hits, developed and published by Altron. This collection of minigames is similar to something like Namco's Point Blank, and supports both the shuttle mouse and the Sega Stunner. I knew nothing about this one until I discovered it on eBay a few years after the Saturn left the Japanese market. It was cheap, and I knew it was a gun game, so I couldn't resist the purchase. And you know what? This game isn't half bad at all. Each minigame gives you different mechanics that you must meet to be successful. Sometimes it's as simple as just shooting whatever pops up, testing your speed and accuracy. Other times it will test your judgment, giving you puzzles to work with. There's nothing here complicated though, and it looks and sounds good enough to be a worthwhile addition to your light gun collection. It was also released in Europe by Sega themselves, giving you options in other languages if you want it. Ninja Jajamaru-kun was a Jellicoe published joint that was released in late 1997. This was another one that flew right under my radar, and I'd not actually play it until well into the 2000s. It's a 3D action platformer with a wonky camera and simplistic play mechanics. There's nothing really difficult here to come to terms with. You need only avoid or dispatch enemies to get to the end of the level and move on. The graphics are decent, if a bit uninspired, and run well enough to not hamper the gameplay. The camera, on the other hand, does that just fine on its own. Instead of a free-flowing camera like most 3D platformers, this camera is locked in position until you tap the L and R shoulder buttons to switch it to whatever direction you are facing. This is fatiguing in the more confined stages you'll play, often resulting in frustration and being hit by things you can't see. The larger, more open levels are more forgiving, allowing you to move faster and be more agile. The arena-style boss battles are even better, as you stay locked onto your target the entire time. This one has a ton of problems that will challenge your tolerance levels to be sure, but I still had a little bit of fun with it. Once I got the hang of the camera, I enjoyed it a whole lot more. Another one that would pass me by unnoticed was Nin Penmanmaru, yet another 3D platformer, this time developed by Tamtam and published by Enix in late 1997. Starring a ninja penguin, I had a tough time finding anything to love about this one. The graphics are colorful and everything runs well, but the gameplay is truly tough to enjoy. I feel like I'm controlling a Mack truck when I'm turning this little guy, and the jump mechanics are slow and frustrating. Missed jumps mean climbing back up multiple levels of obstacles, especially later in the game. There is a triple jump that can make the game more tolerable when mastered, but gameplay is still tough to come to terms with. I would play many other great 3D platformers like Mario 64 before playing this, no doubt souring me on the ancient mechanics this game employs. Still, if you enjoy slower, more methodical style games with cutesy themes, you may find some enjoyment here. You're gonna need some serious patience though, so go in expecting some hardship. In late 1998, I was well aware of Mizubaku Daiboken, also known as Liquid Kids, based on the original Taito arcade game and ported to the Saturn by Ving. This platformer has a heroic platypus trying to rescue his girlfriend and other platypus along the way. Armed with water bombs, you'll soak your enemies and kick them off the screen. Things get all kinds of crazy though, with countless obstacles and bad guys coming out of the woodwork to stop you. Liquid Kids here is a gorgeous 2D experience, loaded with fantastic animation and color. Even for a 1990 arcade release, the source material for this game was truly impressive, and the Saturn translates it flawlessly in the home port. Matching the graphics perfectly is the soundtrack that fits the visual stylings of the presentation, often being just as happy and colorful as what you're seeing on screen. The real star of the show here is the gameplay, however. You don't just throw water at enemies and kill them. Oh no. The gameplay actually gives you things in the environment to deal with as well. Water wheels can help or hinder you. There's even vehicles that can be used by your water bombs to help you through the levels if you wish. The game is challenging too, with one single hit ending your life. While this is usually a frustrating design choice, you start back exactly where you died, giving you another chance immediately to deal with what killed you before. Despite knowing what the game was and being aware of it the day it hit the Saturn, it was at a time when the Saturn was in decline in Japan, and import releases in the US were climbing up in price, costing $80 or so regularly. I decided to skip this one at release, and hoping that it would get cheaper in price as time went on. It really never did, staying high on eBay for years after, and then exploding in recent years to hundreds of dollars. I'll leave you to decide its worth, but I can tell you confidently that Liquid Kids is a great arcade experience and is definitely worth playing. I hope you guys enjoyed my episode on obscure Japanese Sega Saturn games. If you like the channel, please like and subscribe. If you're interested in supporting the channel, I have a Patreon and a PayPal link that you can go to and do that there. I am Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.